My Aunt Vav does not believe in natural death. She says that every death happens as a result of the earth reclaiming you, be that for good reasons or bad, curses or something awful has latched itself onto you or takes you. She says it doesn't matter whether or not you have a good spirit inside of you. It does not matter about your deeds, good or bad, for the earth does not think like a person does, and neither do the things we instinctually fear. When I was 4, I met Vav for the first time that I could actually remember. My mother and I went to stay with her because our neighbor's kid had gone missing, and my family, being hyper-vigilant about these kind of things, took me to Aunt Vav. Aunt Vav lives in the Northern Territory, on a large property off Stewart Highway. Her house is a shed, with concrete floors and corrugated iron walls and a roof. She has no groundwater or attachment to the mains, so she relies on a large rainwater tank for shower/drinking water. Vav has a metric fuck ton of guns and stuff. I'm not entirely sure if it's all legal, but she's a woman living all alone with only dogs for company for a good amount of time, so fair enough. Now, Aunt Vav comes from some really old blood of warlocks and druids from Scotland and Wales, but she thoroughly believes in the spirits and creatures of Australia. As far as I know, her husband died when I was a baby, and Vav keeps his ashes on the shelf in the living room, in an urn, with the ashes of the 2 babies they lost. I don't remember much of the visit when I was 4, but I do remember that Vav never kept her 5 large dogs on chains. It caused my mother great distress, for she worried that the pit bull/bull mastiffs would harm us. All my life, Vav has ignored her concerns. She has always said that people who chain up their dogs are idiots, for a dog doesn't belong on a chain. She says they can't protect you on a chain. And sure enough, the dogs never harmed us. Instead, would often come on walks with us, ever watching and herding us close to the house. Now, I have visited Vav many times over the years, and as I got older, she has given her wisdom to me. I don't particularly give a fuck if you believe me or not, but I am just offering these stories to you because I thought it would be good to share them. Basically, there are several things that I've become sure of. The first is that when Vav dies, I will be the one who inherits the house and the land, and I'm not particularly sure if I still want it when she does. Secondly, Vav is cursed. She says that her grandparents did awful things that angered the spirits, and it has been passed down to her, as she is the one who has the blood, and apparently I do as well. When I was 9, I was sleeping on a mattress at Vav's house in the living room, because my mom was in the hospital in Darwin due to complications with her pregnancy. I went to sleep after watching some Rugrats on VHS when I was woken up by the dogs. Vav had 7 dogs at this point, with 3 of the original 5. The rest were younger. I could hear them barking and snarling like crazy, but it was beyond anything I'd ever heard dogs sound like. And I've heard what dogs are like when they're chasing down a wild boar. I was pretty afraid and got up to go look for Aunt Vav, only to find her already sitting at the table by the kitchen door. She was slowly loading a rifle, had the pockets on her belt bulging with ammo, and there was a shotgun and machete on the table across from her. I remember asking her what was wrong with the dogs, and her looking up at me with a smile. I don't know, Blue, but let's go have a squiz. She let me hold the machete in its sheath as we left the house, and led me to the edge of the veranda. The area around us was lit up in all directions from her perimeter lights, which she must have put on whenever it was that she woke up from the noises. She propped her shotgun up against one of the beams. I remember her eyes sharp and bright as she scanned the area. She whistled for the dogs and they came running, whining and snarling, with the ruff on their backs raised all the way down to their spines. This is private property. You're trespassing. If you don't understand, respond immediately, or I will use force to remove you. Aunt Vav planted one foot a little in front of the other as she held up the rifle, and I simply stood there, being about as useful as a bag of shit, my hand finding anchor on the back of Ripper, who was squirming with his muscles all hunched up under my palm. Now, in this area, there were no streetlights at all, in any direction that you can see, so while the stars seem to be endless in the sky, you cannot see a fucking thing. We stand there with nothing but the sounds of dogs whining. Usually, you can hear frogs or insects and ambient noise, but it was like the whole area was holding its breath. Vav? I said, trying not to piss my pants. I don't understand why she wasn't calling the police. When we heard it, there was a thump. Respond. A fucking gurgled mess of words were hissed at us from somewhere beyond the line of the light, and there were rustles from grasses in the direction Vav was pointing the rifle. At this point, all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I pissed myself. Vav hissed at me for a torch, so I gave her one of the big yellow ones that were on the ground by the house. fumbling the machete but not totally fucking it up, even as warm urine made my legs itch and my jeans stick to me. You. She swung the light beam back and forth, but it didn't reach very far, and I didn't realize what she was doing. There was a reflection from a pair of fucking eyes out there in the dark, yellow-green spots that stood a little taller than me. Vav didn't even hesitate. Sick 'em, just like that. All 7 of the dogs took off into the darkness, their snarls like little battle cries as they went to chase down whatever was out there. I just wanted to go back inside when Vav suddenly tilted her head, listening. There was a quiet thump from somewhere to the left of us, and Vav handed me the torch and told me to shine it out into the dark. I was nearly crying, and when she saw the eyes, Vav started punching out rounds towards it. I dropped the torch and covered my ears against the sound. There were several thumps that sounded like a frightened rabbit, but so much louder, bigger. Vav swore, picked up her shotgun and the torch, and ran off into the darkness. She was swallowed into the blue-black night, her torch beam cutting through it. There were more thumps. That's when I saw it, illuminated for just a moment, its back arched like a cat with a big, thick tail. But it was easily half as tall as Vav, with legs built for running on all fours and a massive head. There were more shots in the dark as the torch beam hit the ground and rolled away from the thing. The thing was screaming, loud, guttural cries. I could hear the dogs hightailing it back to the house at that noise. I was frozen against the wall, and Vav must have picked up the torch because the beam was shining sporadically back and forth, searching. I saw what you had. Vav was screaming into the dark. I saw what you had. Then Vav let out the strangest moaning sound, like the type that comes when you're on a roller coaster and feel ill, but can't scream. She shined the light out on the trees as the dogs came thundering back, barking more. Spud was holding his left front leg off the ground, his pained yelps between his snarls. Then, Blue, are you still there? And if there's one thing Vav has taught me, it's that if someone calls out to you in a situation like this, you respond. I'm here, Vav. I heard her mumbling out there, still shining the light out, as the dog circled her. Get inside. Get inside now. I was hit in the eyes by the beam of swinging torchlight as Vav sprinted towards me, and I had turned to get inside when something stepped right parallel to me, off the veranda. I only saw a long, skinny limb, about the same circumference as my own, take a long stride towards where Vav was. It had to have been a leg, but it was at least half as tall as the roof, and whatever the rest of it was had to be much taller. I screamed and ran as fast as my legs could carry me to the door, my slippery, sweaty hands managing a grip on the screen door handle, ripping it open. Then came the steel door bar, and I pulled it open as Vav's shoe hit the veranda edge. Once I got inside, Vav barreled in after me, slamming the door and locking it. She was sweating and white as milk. I was crying. Oh, Blue, I'm sorry, Blue, she was saying. It's okay. The tall ones wouldn't hurt you. You're a kid. They wouldn't hurt you. It was only in that morning that Vav sat me down and told me the tall thing by the veranda was something that hunts the other things, the things that can't speak. She told me the tall ones came from the trees, and they only cause mischief, usually, but they travel after the others, because the others take people, they take children. Vav spent a long time on the phone that morning, and made me stay inside watching my movies. She left for a while, but came back and told me that Spud had died. I cried for a long time. Spud was a good dog. That afternoon, a ute pulled up, and there were 3 Aboriginal men in the back, and 2 in the front. They dragged a dead kangaroo out of the back and left it on the veranda, and Vav went outside to speak with them. She said that the things had taken one of the Aboriginal children and left the kangaroo as a symbol of good faith to pay for Spud, because they believe that Vav is a bush hag, a cursed witch. She told them that the tall ones were searching the property, and they said they had called them after the ones who took the kid. Vav said that the kangaroo was payment enough, and they could leave the property peacefully. Vav said that they feared her because she was cursed, that they have to repay whatever they take from her because everything she owns is property of the dark spirits. That night was the first time Vav had let me see the things out there. I asked her if I could tell people. She told me I could, but that nobody would believe me except the Aboriginals, and then they would be afraid. There are things I have done now that I know people would never believe. I don't expect anyone to. If you do, great, thank you for listening. If you don't, it's okay. I wouldn't either. But these are the main things Vav has taught me that I follow. You cover their tracks to protect other people. If you find a body or kill something, you take it to the edge of the property and the others will claim it. You never try to take them alive. Do not hesitate. You never try to get payment from them or use them to claim payment in any way. Do not keep souvenirs. They are not people. They have no grasp on human logic or emotions. I will post more stories chronologically of me and Vav if anybody wants to read them. It's about time for some spoopy OC on here anyway. When I was 10, my babysitter was a squalling little thing, pink and pudgy. My parents were fighting, so my mom packed us all up and brought us to Aunt Vav's house while my dad was working away. I think my mom was lonely. It seems to be a trait in the family, being lonely. My mom would spend her days laughing and cooing at the baby, while systematically ignoring me. "Blue," Aunt Vav would say, "come help me mend a piece of fence." I wondered why my mom was getting so distant towards me. I think it was because I looked so much like my dad. I have his thick red hair, I have his blue eyes, paler than my mother's. I've always wondered if she truly hates me or is disgusted by me because I'm the reason she married my dad. Whenever I used to worry myself sick about it, with no other kids to play with, Aunt Vav would be there. "Blue," she would always begin. Then, "Come on, we're going for a swim. Let's go for a drive. Come help me check out the water tank. Come read to me. Let's paint. Let's go looking for quartz. Come with me into town." So I did those things. And throughout those seemingly ordinary chores, Vav would bestow upon me small tidbits of information regarding things that had become a secondary part of my life for a little under a year. I would half listen to her telling me stories about aboriginal cryptids, dreamtime stories, telling me which parts were true and which parts were false. All the while, my mother became closer and closer to my baby sister, Sandy, and further from me. I think that is why I care for Vav so much. The amount she raised me while my mother and I grew apart was what caused me to act how I did. Anyway, one of those days my dad shows up at the house. Vav takes me and the baby out so they can fight/talk it out. The entire time, Vav looks annoyed, probably because she can't smoke around the baby while my parents are yelling awful things at each other. It's pretty hot, but I decide to go exploring anyway and take some of the dogs with me, and Vav stays with Sandy. Usually, I didn't go into the bush without Vav because she's told me not to, and snakes and shit, but I was so angry that I ended up going around the back of the house and into the bushes and trees. I ended up picking up a long stick and beating the shit out of a tree trunk until I was exhausted enough to finally cry about the situation. That was when I heard the humming, a deep, low hum that was continuous, without melody. Now, normally, you wouldn't go and check it out, but I was a pretty fucking stupid kid, and the more I listened to the humming, the more it felt right to go after it. I followed the source, and it was only a minute or so away when I found it. There was a bloated, rotting kangaroo corpse. The smell was so utterly heavy in the air, I could feel it in my fucking throat, almost suffocating. Maggots were wriggling around in the exposed parts of the skull, falling gracelessly onto the leaves and dirt. Flies were heavy on its fur, and parts of its flesh were discolored and pulled oddly. Things that rot seemed to always be warped, twisted versions of the living. It was then I heard the sound of the grass moving, and I looked up to see something small moving through the grass. I was frightened, and I gasped. It was then the dogs took off after it. It took me too long to make the command for the dogs to stop, because Herc came strutting back with his kill, an orphaned Joey. "Herc, drop." Herc's tail wagged in a little circle as he sat down. "Drop." He dropped the twitching body on the dirt, and I pulled the infant towards me. The little thing was bent oddly at its back. I could feel where its spine had twisted and one of its hind legs kicked out as though it couldn't help itself. It was making small noises. I tried shushing it, cuddling it to my body, but nothing worked. Eventually it stopped moving, and I held it for just a little longer. "I'm sorry," I said, petting the Joey. "I'm sorry. I didn't see you." I didn't want to take it back to the house because Mom would get mad. She wouldn't let me touch Sandy with dirty hands, saying that it would all be my fault if the baby got sick. So I put it on the ground next to its mother, and when I went to stand up, Herc nudged me excitedly, and I fell. I fell face first into the mother's corpse, surrounded by the thick smell of death. I could hear the maggots eating, feel them squirming against me, and she was so slippery and putrid. I thought I was gonna pass out. I couldn't even scream because I didn't want to open my mouth, but my hand closed around something inside the kangaroo. Something solid and hard, and when I pulled myself up, so I was kneeling, I kept going. It was a bone that detached itself from the rest, the muscle and sinew slewing off it as I tugged. I scrambled backwards until my back hit the thin trunk of a tree. I gagged and I couldn't see properly. I scrubbed at my face with my sleeve, and once I could, I stood up and staggered out of there, determined on getting to the water tank so I could use the hose attached to it on my body. I remember the journey taking forever. I had vomited twice and was dry gagging, trying not to let any of the kangaroo fluids inside of my mouth or eyes. Vav and the baby were on the other side of the house, but Herc was covered in crap too, and he took off towards where she would be. By the time I reached the water tank, I could hear a crunch of boots on some of the dry ground. Blue, what the fuck? Are you okay? Is that blood? My dad came over and dragged me towards the water tank, ripping the hose off its holder and spinning the handle until water came flooding out. I gasped and clawed at him blindly, one hand still curled around the length of bone I had pulled out of the kangaroo. My dad was petting me down, wiping the gore off me with quick, efficient scrubs of his hand as he directed the hose over me. Close off, Blue. Come on, you have to get the blood off. Dad pulled off my shirt, getting me the bend at the waist so it came off easier, without pouring the gore water down my body again. Then my pants and underwear and my shoes and socks. Are you hurt? My dad kept asking. I kept shaking my head no. Oh my god. Bill, is that blood? Where's Sandy? My mother's voice came from behind my dad and I felt my stomach drop. Where's Sandy? A sick, bubbly feeling deep in my torso overcame me like a flame. Where's Sandy? I was so utterly angry at my mother in that moment that I raised my hand, pointing the bone outwards. Vav came around the corner, then carrying Sandy. The moment I realized Sandy was what I was pointing at, I felt victorious. My mother raced over to Vav and took the baby from her, my hand wavering as Sandy was hidden from my view. My mother took her inside and did not look back at me once. It was then I looked at Vav's face and she looked horrified. It lasted for a few moments as my dad made me drop the bone and put my arm down, more water sloshing over my head and making me cough. When I saw Vav's face again, she looked furious. I told my dad and Vav about the kangaroo, about the Joey, and my dad went to go check it out. While he was gone, Vav grabbed my arm, her short nails digging into my skin as she held tight enough the bruise. Do you have any idea what you've done? She said. She pulled me towards the veranda and faced me to sit in one of the lawn chairs while she sat opposite. I felt something like dread settle in me. I shook my head. Blue, why did you point that bone at Sandy? Because I wanted to punish my mother, I thought, but didn't say. Vav stared at me for a while, with her lips pursed. Do you want Sandy to be gone? She asked, her hands wringing together on her lap. I was angry, I said. Angry at Sandy? I shook my head. If you weren't angry at Sandy, why would you do that, Blue? I've told you that you don't curse people here. Why would you? She suddenly leaned over and grabbed my face. You do not punish others to hurt your real target. Do you understand me, Blue? I started crying. Blue, you've done a terrible thing today. Go inside and shower. That night, Vav kept her distance from me. The next morning, the dead Joey was on the veranda, as though Herc had dropped it off. Vav made me scoop it up into a shoebox and bury it, and my dad left that night to go back to work. For those of you who aren't familiar, bone pointing is a means of wishing death upon those who have wronged you. There are many different ways of preparing the bone, but you have to really mean it. You cannot take back bone pointing, but you can try to appease the curse by offering it something else in return. Vav said that an offering of myself wouldn't work because I'm a husk like her. She asked me if I wanted to use my mother, but I said no. She asked me if I wanted to use Herc. Then I said no. That night, Vav went out in her truck and didn't come back until it was very late. She found me watching over Sandy while she slept. I've taken care of it, she said, and then left to her room. Vav didn't speak to me for a couple of days, and then it was as though nothing had ever happened. My dad wanted to move away for work after that, and between all of that and my parents' rocky relationship, I didn't see Vav again until I was 13. This is amazingly scary, man. Can you please explain what the tall ones are and describe the black animal thing again? The tall ones, as Vav has explained to me, are, I guess, a bit like dryads. Tall as trees, incredibly thin, and often get up to mischief. I have more stories about the tall ones to come. They hunt down the black creatures. At first, I thought they looked like crocodiles for the size of them, but they have longer legs and can move their spines in directions that crocodiles can't. They have much higher flexibility. Also, the thumping was apparently their tails on the ground. They have huge, thick tails, but Vav told me that they're mostly hollow inside. It's how they move the children they take. They lure you close, then swallow you up, like an anglerfish dangling a light. They rove in groups of 2 or more, and head back to their territory before they consume the children properly. The tall ones frighten them, as they're supposed to be equally strong and do not require rest as often. When I was 13, Vav helped me make my first friend. I used to go to a school called Humpty Doo Primary. When I was little, I got pulled out of that for the move that lasted until I was 13. It was just before my 13th birthday that my parents' relationship ultimately became totally unsalvageable, and my mother began the lengthy process of trying to take both me and Sandy away from my dad. When I was 11, my mother was pregnant again. There was something wrong, and the baby was stillborn. It turns out the baby had too much fluid in the brain, and the brain had not been able to properly form, almost like a brain slurry. At least that's how Aunt Vav explained it when I asked. Long story short, there was a lot of grieving between my parents. My dad lost custody. My mom had me and Sandy, and we moved back to Darwin. I just wanted to see my dad, but I felt like I was probably never going to see him again. The court costs that he had to pay, including my mother's, were sizable, not to mention the child support and other payments my mother had claimed. The last time I saw my dad, he was getting into a car, looking like an empty shell. My mother was flourishing with her new job at the bank, and I was busy trying to keep Sandy stable at this point. When my mother announced I would be able to stay with Aunt Vav for the school holidays, I think she wanted me gone, and didn't want me home alone to ruin things, because Sandy was in daycare. Now, I love my little sister, a whole bunch, but she was still a baby, barely a person. She was a sponge just absorbing the world around her, so I couldn't tell her why I would blue tack bay leaves in every corner of her room. I couldn't tell her why I didn't think Grandma died because she was just old. So, for the winter holidays, between terms 2 and 3 of my first year of high school, I went out and hung out with Aunt Vav. When I saw Vav for the first time in nearly 3 years, she pulled me into a hug. She was pleased to see that I had the knife she sent for me on my 12th birthday tucked into my belt. We hung out for a couple of days, and then she piled me into her car. "We're gonna hang out with some real country," she told me, pushing my cap down on my head. Now, Aunt Vav's closest neighbors were a big family who had a lot of sheep, a lot of cows, and a lot of land. They lived about 20 minutes away. I remember Vav selling them a couple of her distant areas because what the hell was she gonna use them for anyway? Vav prefers being further away from people because she thinks humans weren't built to live in close quarters like cities. She says humans make each other crazed. She would go on about ancient nomadic lifestyles and then territories. She said that being surrounded by so many people is bad for you because people don't like each other. We headed out. It was getting towards evening, but that night we got there was only an hour or so left of daylight. The family has a pretty big house with a big shed, plenty of tractors and shit around. I briefly met the adults before Vav handed me off to the kids. There were 10 of us, 3 siblings, blonde and all boys. There are 2 half-caste siblings, a boy and a girl, and 3 brunette kids, 2 older girls and a little boy. Another lone kid who was really tan, but probably European or some shit, and me. I'm the only 13-year-old, and our ages range from 10 to 18. There were a couple of other kids, but they were all under 6 and with the adults. The setup was that the backyard was a large bush area, but with wide paths cut into it, so that the kids who lived there, the blonde boys, could ride their bikes through it. One of the brunette girls was the oldest. I could tell she was just hanging out with us because she was on babysitting duty. The half-caste boy introduced himself as Rabbit, and I realized it was because he was born with a cleft lip and palate, known as a hair lip, and was missing one of his front teeth, so I guess it made sense. The scar was a pretty prominent feature on his face, but he spoke pretty well. He was 15. When I was introduced as Blue, a couple of them tittered. Blue, the redhead. Australia has a thing for ironic nicknames. The other loner tan kid was named Saul, and he was also 15. We hung outside. where the family had a swing set and a large climbing frame, just talking shit, playing tag, and then we ate dinner, which was just a big barbecue. The adults started drinking, and we kids left to our own devices. So Mandy, the oldest girl, went inside and got a dolphin torch for us to play a game of Spotlight. We played for a while. It was exhilarating, getting to just play random games with other kids. At one point, Saul and I were the only ones sitting on a trampoline, watching the others play when Rabbit started yelling, "Saul, you piece of shit! I said I spotted you!" Immediately, Saul called back, "What do you mean? I'm over here with Blue." Then Rabbit came out of the bush track like his ass was on fire. "Fuck!" He was screaming, "Dad!" Rabbit's dad was a big guy who owned a whole bunch of mango farms, and he was pretty drunk at this point, but he came out of the house anyway. Saul and I jumped off the trampoline, and we could hear one of the blonde boys scream. Vav, Saul's parents, and the dad of the blonde boys came tearing out of the house with torches, and Vav stopped by me to check me over. "Go away by the truck, Blue," she said, and ran after the other parents, who were off in the bush. Rabbit's dad took his torch and told the other kids to go inside the house. Mandy appeared, carrying her little brother, and shouting for her sister. By this point, Rabbit's mom had disappeared into the house. I'm sure she was calling the cops, but if something serious was happening, they are a couple of hours away. I could hear the parents yelling for the other kids, and Rabbit was crying when Saul's hand slipped into my own. "Your aunt said to wait by the truck, right?" I nodded and headed that way, pulling Saul along by the hand. We both climbed into Vav's car. I knew why. Vav had been teaching me how to shoot over the last couple of days. While I was far from adept, I knew she kept a pistol in the driver's side door, just in case. Saul and I sat there in silence, listening to the adults call out the other kids' names. At one point, there was a yell from one side of the car, a section of the bush track. We both jumped, something knocked on the window, and Rabbit was standing there, puffy-eyed and looking in at us. We opened the door, and he climbed in, sniffling. "They can't find Ben," he said. It was the name of the eldest blonde boy. We waited there for ages, until Vav opened the door and ushered us out. "It's fine," she said. "We found Ben. Looks like he's been dragged through a few bushes, and he'll need a couple of stitches, but he's fine." Once Rabbit and Saul were with their parents, Vav ushered me out of the house and into the truck. We drove home in silence. "Did Ben say what dragged him?" I asked. Vav pursed her lips. "It was probably a junkie," she said, but then she looked at me, her face in half shadow from the high beams. "But then, what would a junkie be doing all the way out there?" she asked. "It's a 2-hour drive from town," I agreed. "Why didn't we wait and talk to the police?" Vav laughed. "Only get involved with the police if you're being arrested, Blue." "Were you the one that found Ben?" "It was me and Kurt, who was Ben's dad." "Was it a junkie?" I asked. Vav clicked her tongue. "Sure." We both slept on a mattress on the floor that night, though I don't think Vav actually slept. Towards the end of the holidays, Vav went missing for a couple of days. A friend of hers she called Animal came up and said he was itching to go on a hunt. He was this huge white guy covered in tattoos and looked like a bikie. Vav said that I'd be staying with the blonde kid's family, and that if she wasn't back the next day, to stay with them until they found her body. Animal's body, or her truck. She laughed then and blew her cigarette smoke out of her nose. She said she was going to take care of the predators lurking around our area. She packed herself, Herc, Ripper, Boof, and Banjo into her truck. Animal had 2 dogs of his own that went in the tray, and they left after dropping me off. I didn't see Vav for 3 days. On the 4th day, her truck rumbled up to the house, and I'd been playing basketball with Ethan and Daniel, the 2 youngest boys. Ben stayed inside. I went over to her and noticed she was holding herself oddly. Banjo and Ripper were gone. One of Animal's dogs was in the back, but no Animal. Shelly and Kurt came out, the boys' parents, and had a conversation with Vav, who accepted 2 envelopes from them. I said bye to my neighbors/friends, and on my way home, I was itching with questions, but didn't know where to start. "What was the envelope for?" I asked. "Services rendered," Vav replied, then turned up the radio. Garth Brooks made it impossible to talk anymore. When we got back to her place, Vav hosed blood out of her truck tray. I wanted to ask questions about where Animal was, about what she was hunting, if she was successful, but she had to have been. She came back, hadn't she? But Vav is terrifying. Sometimes she looks at people the same way she stares down a kangaroo. It's the most detached, lingering stare. Hungry. It's like she doesn't see a person, but she only sees parts. Vav is a predator through and through. That night, she spent 4 hours in the bath with a bottle of Jack Daniels. She was shivering when she came out in her pajamas. She stared, almost unblinking at the TV until she went to bed. The new dog was named Job. When I was 14, Vav finally decided to let me help. I'd seen some shit, but they don't really deserve their own stories. But I do remember the moment I had Vav's approval. I was at Vav's, I was 14, and was there for the Christmas holidays. I was gonna be in grade 10 in the new year. Once again, my mother wanted nothing to do with me. Sometimes she could hardly even look at me, and Sandy wasn't much better. I was asleep a couple of days before Christmas, having a nap in front of the living room fan because it was almost too hot to move when the dogs went off. I lurched up and I heard Vav screaming, and then she was in the house, bleeding from the arms, face, and neck. "It's the dogs!" she screamed. "The dogs have got fucking insane!" She was wild-eyed and nearly crying. "Blue, get my gun. I can't use my fucking hand. I think Herc broke my wrist. Get my fucking gun." So I did. I got her shotgun down and loaded it. The dogs ran around, barking and snarling madly. "The water's been poisoned," she hissed. "It's the only explanation." We drank bottled water and only showered in the stuff from the tank. However, the dogs had to drink it. I went to open the front door when, it must have been Boof, threw himself against it, making maddened sounds. "They've gone mad," she was saying. "They've gone fucking mad." She tried to take the gun from me, but couldn't get a grip, and hissed in the pain as her wrist twisted awkwardly. "I'll do it," I heard myself saying. "I'll do it, Vav." She looked at me, her eyes narrowed. "Okay, alright." I went over to the window and pulled back the glass slide, then hit the screen on the corner so I could pull it off. The dogs heard the noise and came running, but I'd already dropped the metal mesh screening and pushed the barrel through it. I felt my finger hesitate as Herc came running, intending to throw himself at the window. Then I pulled. It's like a dream from there. The buckshot exploded and the pellets ripped through Herc's face and chest. He went backwards, a spray of gore raining around. Job bit down on Herc's corpse, shaking his head wildly. I fired again. Reload, fire, reload, fire. They never show you that in movies that don't have an adult rating. A shotgun with buckshot does a lot of damage close up. It shreds and tears and rips, leaving behind a state of carnage so brutal. It's almost pretty. I was in a haze as I walked back to the front door, undid the lock, and stepped out. My slaughter pile was still dripping outside the windows. Bits and pieces flung out into the yard, but I'd only gotten 4 dogs in the end. We had another. I found Boof had dragged himself around the side of the house, whining and growling all the same. "Boof?" I asked, lowering the gun a little. I knew this dog since he was a puppy. Boof let out a ferocious growl and jerkily moved towards me. The fecal smell in the air, a sign that I'd hit him in the guts before. I fired, watching his body ragdoll away before settling, slumping. I barely remember going back inside and putting the gun on the table for Vav. I remember her patting me on the back as I stared at the dog's remains before she took a step back. I vomited all over myself and was a sobbing mess. Vav simply petted me on the shoulder until I was done, then pushed me into the shower. Once I came out, Vav was sitting on the table, cleaning her wounds. "You hurt?" she asked. "No." "Help me then." I helped her splint her wrist and wrap it. Then we both stood outside with cans of Coke, watching the flies swarm over the bodies. "It's too hot to leave them," she said. "I'll do it," I said. Vav couldn't. Now with her wrist all swollen and fucked up, I picked up the smaller pieces and put them into trash bags, and then wrapped the rest in tarps and put them in a truck tray as well. It was gross. A couple of times the tarp slipped and a thick paste of hot blood and torn tissue would slide down my shoulders, chest, and back, and flies kept buzzing around my head, trying my eyes and mouth for moisture. We dumped the bodies at the edge of the property. Vav said that the dogs didn't belong to us anymore. We didn't have a right to bury them. She asked if I wanted to go back to my mom. I told her no. "What did this?" I asked. Vav laughed. "You should leave the country," she said instead. I ignored her. "Vav, what the fuck did that? Stop lying to me." Vav laughed some more. "Let's see then, Blue." She made a call to the water company to bring a tanker out to refill our water. They said they'd be there in 2 days, so we showered and prepared to not shower again until it was refilled. We hosed down the veranda first. Then she ran the shower, the kitchen sink, and the outside taps for hours. All night, we sat there and listened to the water drain. "It'll be in there," she said the next day. Her bare toes in the yard that was now more of a swamp. It would have dried fairly quickly with the heat and sun. She handed me a couple of towels. "Don't touch the water. Don't touch whatever's down there with your hands." I pulled on a backpack with towels and climbed the ladder to the top. I opened the tank. There was a ladder on the inside going down for cleaning. It was pretty much empty, with very little under a foot of water left. I shone a small torch into the water, but couldn't see anything. So I moved my foot around in the water when I bumped something. I nearly screamed when I felt the sight of a snake under my foot, but it didn't move. I pulled out a towel and reached down. I pulled it up. It was heavy, almost as long as I was tall, and had several bulges in its middle. I wrapped it as much as I could, shrugging off the backpack before putting the snake inside, then putting it on my back again. The water that had soaked into a material licked down my spine, ass, and legs. I kicked around some more, but there was nothing else. Once I was down, I pulled the snake out, and Vav used the stick to poke the snake out until it was flat. She frowned and used part of the towel to hold the snake still, resting her injured hand on it. It made me hold the bottom half below the bulges, keeping it stretched and taut. She ran a knife down the belly, and the snake burst like a teddy bear with a busted seam. The bulges in the intestine made Vav swear, and she hacked at the snake until the smooth onyx stones were revealed, almost egg-shaped. They were quite dark and smooth. I thought they were some sort of river stone. "Well," she said, "it looks like he was right." Vav looked at me. "It's gonna take everything." We haven't had another dog since. When I was 15, things started to get more real, as well as a lot more fucked. Vav began to look more strained around the eyes. She was sleeping less, drinking less, smiling less. The tall man made her laugh though. "It won't hurt us," she said. "Those are the least of our worries." But I did worry. I'm gonna share the next story with you, because, while not overly scary, gives you an idea of the shit I've had to deal with while staying with Vav. Yes, the Christmas after the snake and stone incident was god-awful. Right after, Vav had made some phone calls, and some Aboriginal people came over. They left offerings at the gate, and didn't approach the house. "They're calling good spirits here," she said, "but nothing is truly good, though. Remember that." I became good friends with some of the kids from the party. Rabbit wasn't allowed to come to my house, but I could hang out if it was with Ethan and Daniel. Saul came over a couple of times, and while my house freaked him out a bit, Saul was a freak anyway, so it was cool. Anyway, so yeah, 15, wow. I was doing pretty average at school, just passing, and got contacted by police because nobody could find my dad, and he wasn't paying child support. Whatever. Some of the Aboriginals and even the white kids at the school started bullying me, calling me the White Devil or White Serpent. Whatever, fuckers. Saul thought it was hilarious. Why not give them something to be afraid of? White Devil. And in hindsight, Saul is the fucking worst guy. He's still a good friend of mine, but he is the fucking worst. Once more, I found myself below Darwin, near Vav's house. At this point, we had geese. Let me tell you something right here, right fucking now. Geese are excellent guard dogs. However, geese will protect your house from everything, including you. Geese are the absolute fucking worst. Also, they are generally terrifying, but I haven't been able to stomach the thought of having another dog. And I don't want to ask Vav about it, because she'll give me the blank stare that makes me feel like a limpet. I once asked her why she didn't sell the property, and she just told me it was all that was tying her to the earth. But then she threw a cigarette butt at the geese while cackling, so I didn't bother to ask her again. Anyways, Vav's toilet. If you hadn't already guessed for the first couple of posts, it's a fucking outhouse. So if you have to take a shit at night, you have to grab a torch and hobble across the yard to the little building a distance away that you don't want to be walking at night. When you've experienced the sheer fucking horror on this property, I have, a couple of times it was random shit, like a frog that was sitting under the lip, grabbing my ass. Now, when we had dogs, it was cool. They generally wake up at the commotion of me walking through the dark, and come chill outside the toilet while I took a shit. Safety first, you know. However, geese are never your friend, and geese do not give a fuck about you. Why? because geese are the fucking worst. It was on one of these nights I woke up with the need to toilet badly. Now I fucking hate this feeling, but nature calls. I have, however, started carrying a machete with me. So juggling my torch and machete, I made it to the outhouse, and I'm sitting there doing the do when I hear something's footsteps approaching the place. Let it be known I was not a happy camper at this fucking point. But first, I'm gonna give you a little more background on the tall men. They are mischief makers at their most basic. They like to fuck with people by moving shit around, breaking shit, and scaring the fuck out of you. To these guys, it's all in good fun. However, all in good fun becomes terrifying fucking bullshit when the guys doing it are taller than your house and pretty much invisible unless you see them, in which case they're even more terrifying because the closest thing I could think of to compare them to is a stick insect from A Bug's Life. So this fucking asshole, let's call him Jeff the tall man, has been lurking around for a while now, and will continue to do so unless we remove all the trees or stop the offerings on our land. At this point, I'm about ready to torch the whole fucking place, because I do not have the fucking time for Jeffrey. Because if I'm scared and trying to take a shit, my anus slams shut, like some Indiana Jones tomb trap bullshit. Say, fuck you, Jeff, out loud on my behalf. It'll make me feel better about how much fucking rage I hold for Jeff the tall man. So, anyway, I'm fairly sure this is Jeff outside, because this is the 5th time he's done this. Jeff man, please go away. And then there's a soft thump on the roof as Jeff leans his elbow on it or some shit, I don't know, but I was ready to Hulk out. And then something hums and I hear Jeff fucking leap the fuck away. Like, Jeff is gone. Jeff is out of here. Now why would Jeff leave? Because somebody is humming outside. Somebody is out there fucking humming. So I decide to fucking chance this shit. Vav? I wait. The humming stops. Vav? At this point, mission shit is a complete disaster. And I'm wiping while I'm standing and trying to pull up my jeans because that was definitely a man's hum. And it frightened away Jeff. At this point, I'm so unhappy. I considered remaining inside this shit tin until daylight, but I really didn't want to fucking die inside of this shit tin. So like the fucking genius I am, I opened the fucking door, torch in one hand, machete in the other, and this guy steps right past the fucking door. However, some sort of PTSD since I've had to deal with this shit occurs, and I react in the opposite of taking things well. I swing the machete forward and it fucking passes through this guy, and he stops and just looks at me. Like, for fuck's sake, the machete went through this guy like he was made of smoke. And my rational brain would later tell me that sometimes spirits of the dead linger at places of unrest, who crave companionship and travel in packs. My exact reaction is to make the noise of a frightened origami kitten and pass out for a solid half of a second. So I stumble, because creepy shit you can physically hit is one thing, but I don't do ghost. I will never fucking do ghost. After that situation just evolved into me trying not to shit out enough bricks to rebuild the pyramids, and turning into the Flash to make it back into the fucking house. Ghosts are fucking terrifying, okay? Because ghosts were once people. Ghosts are not something you can rationalize into being an animal. Ghosts, from my experience, cannot be killed either. Anyway, I ended up telling Vav. She was pretty pissed about it, and told me that yelling tends to make them leave. That's probably the most lighthearted story I have to tell, really. The little shining light, but the next one is another actually scary one. So, keep the thread alive and I'll keep writing, guys. Okay, so this one happened while I was 15. Now, those rocks we found in the snake, well, they went missing shortly after we pulled them out of the reptile. We wrapped them in Ziploc bags and shoved them in a shoebox we kept in the top kitchen cabinet, so I can't tell you the exact time they disappeared, and I can't tell you where they are now. Anyway, one day, Saul and I are waiting for the bus at school to take me back to the house I shared with Mom and Sandy, not Vav's house. Saul turns to me and says that some guy is staring at me, and before pedophile after my young nubile body. So I look around and I can't see anybody. Dude, where? I looked around and Saul had gone really quiet. What the fuck? He said and grabbed my hand. Saul is a hand holder for reals. Anyway, I shake his hand off because Darwin is not somewhere you really want to be seen holding hands with another guy. Fuck Darwin also. We get on the bus and Saul points and goes, "There, that guy." Oh, it's Animal. I wave. He doesn't wave back. I suddenly felt like there was something really fucking wrong. Who is that guy? Introducing Saul, the fucking detective. Sit the fuck down, Saul. What was that? Staring at this guy. We have to sit down. Saul is crammed against the window, and we're both watching as Animal lifts a hand and holds up something. What is that? I lean forward. Oh, this guy is holding a pair of fucking eyes, still attached to the optic nerve at the ends. Okay. Saul makes a high-pitched whine, and Animal grins at me. Fucking biggest shit-eating grin ever. So the entire bus ride, I have to listen to Saul having what sounds like an asthma attack while patting him on the shoulder consoling, while in reality, all I wanted to do was call Vav and ask if Animal was dead or a real fucking creep. Saul gets off a couple of stops after me, so he just stares at me the whole time, and I give him a weak smile and wave as I get off the bus. I have to walk a couple of streets to actually get to my place, so it's usually about a 10-minute walk. However, on this particular day, as soon as the bus turned the corner away from me, I hauled ass. I got to the house in record time of a couple minutes. I reached into my pocket to get my key and felt something slimy. My brain hit the panic button. I yelled, "Oh fuck no." So I ended up reaching in again and producing this fucking eye, and I stood there thinking that this isn't fucking fair, that I don't fucking deserve this, and I just threw this eye as far as I could. I was 900% done with this bullshit. By the time I got inside and cleaned the shit off my keys, changed my pants, and had my phone up to my ear waiting for Vav to answer, I had the most brutal headache. So the last story actually brought back some bad memories. It wasn't that important, and I never saw Animal again, so I'm just gonna move on to when I was 18. The small tidbits between me being 15 and 18 aren't much, just more ghostly shit and a couple of spots of other Australian cryptid bullshit that weren't as full on as they were once I turned 18. But if I'm writing about one, I'll mention in brackets or some shit if I've seen it before and give some basic details. Basically, I'm skipping that chapter of my life because when I was 17, I got meningitis and had to be hospitalized. Hallucinations, needle in the spine and all that. I was a whole pile of suck. A couple of months after that fucking awful experience, I was contacted by Social Security and police because my dad's body was found in a car that had crashed into a tree. He'd been drinking and something happened on the road. I don't know. Combining with the spooky shit in my bad home life, I ended up having a sort of mental breakdown my last year of high school. I had to drop out because I couldn't handle life and stuff. I ended up moving in with Vav for the long haul because my mother and I had this massive fight and she didn't ever want to see my face again. I got out of my funk just after my 18th birthday and also my second job. First job was retail around the corner store. I worked at a privately owned service station, gas station for you Americans. So there was no Shell, Caltex, Star Mart, Woolworths, putting its brand all over shit. It was located a bit out of town on the highway and it wasn't in great shape that spread water over the linoleum constantly. So we had to run a towel over that section every couple of hours. I go to and from work in this fucking lemon that Vav let me use because she had her truck. It was pretty rusty and sometimes the brakes stuck, but at that point I didn't really give a fuck. Anyway, about the shop, it was pretty small. We had only 3 pumps, 2 unleaded, 1 diesel. There was this big freezer about the length of a car outside that had a door on it for ice. Anyway, this ice box would clank every couple hours, quite loudly if you were working night shift, but I was pretty used to it. We had a staff toilet, a shower in the back, a public toilet outside that required a key, and a couple of shitty cameras that watched the door, the till, and the pumps. This place was decked out with the most basic of shit. Basically, it was privately owned and a fuck away from everything else. Our boss, this guy named Matt, was actually pretty good. He always made sure that 2 people worked night shift because people are less likely to rob/murder you if you have more than 1 person in the shop at the time. He also let us watch TV shows, bring in our own movies to watch behind the till on this small ass TV that was on the counter. I worked with 2 people usually on night shift. This Aboriginal woman in her late 20s named Amy, and this other guy named Rooster, who looked like he fell out of a bad place in Europe or some shit. Amy was tall and skinny, and had ever-frowning brown eyes that could barely be bothered to look up from the magazine she poured through. She used to paint her nails in the store weird colors, and I'd let her do mine if she was in a social mood. We fell into an awkward, not quite friends, but a little more than co-workers after I caught her smoking and told her she was a fucking idiot. We were at a fucking petrol station, for fuck's sake. Rooster was different. He had this sack of Ren and Stimpy VHSs he'd watch every time he came in, or else The Simpsons. he used to be the one to use a hammer to make the warped ground near the fridge leak go flat again, and also found it hilarious to play the "Who's That" game with me. You see, when you work night shift at a petrol station, but there is no night counter, it means if people want fuel or snacks or whatever the fuck ever, you have to hit the button that opens the automatic door, because after 10 p.m. we turn off the auto and open it manually. Now the camera facing the door lets us get a look at the people, because sometimes you aren't there watching and you miss them step out of the darkness or their cars into shitty exterior lights. So there's this unspoken rule at Australian gas stations after about 11 p.m. where if you are approaching one that has a night counter and you aren't a fucking insane person, you hold out your hands either side of you, just off your body. This way, we can see that you don't currently have a weapon and really ups your chances of opening the door. You see, we're tapped inside this box until daylight, and if you look dodgy as fuck, we don't open the fucking door. It is the number one rule of being a petrol station clerk working night shift. You don't leave for anything. So, if someone is being actively stabbed outside, you call the police. You do not open the door. You do not leave the store. After you call the police, you call your boss. It's just the way it works. When people show their hands, we decide if they look like they're gonna try to steal or murder us. Then I hit the switch that opens the door. Then it shuts and locks behind them. So, while this person putters around all 5 vials of snacks or other bullshit, we watch them and try to figure out their story. Because night shift is fucking boring. That's the whole point of the "Who Is That" game. It becomes pretty weird because of repeat customers. Every night shift patrol station clerk has a story about at least one repeat customer. For instance, we had one guy come in every Tuesday and Friday between the hours of 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. and he would buy 8 bags of ice, a 4-pack of mini cable ties, and a large iced coffee. Every time, no changes. Each bag of ice is about the size of a 3 or 4-year-old and weighs 5 kilos. This is what makes the "Who Is That" game so much fun, because you have no fucking idea what these people are doing. Now, at this patrol station, we had what I thought was a poltergeist or some shit. Rooster named it Marvin after Hitchhiker's Guide, because he seemed to just be the stropiest son of a bitch. Now, at first, I didn't even know the place had Marvin, but I found out about him on my first night. Now, it's normal for shit to fall off shelves in the shop, and it's normal for outside light to flicker. Sometimes we even had an industrial bug zapper outside that hummed lowly and then crackled as it killed mosquitoes and moths. Anyway, my first night working there, somewhere after 2 a.m., Rooster's episode of Ren and Stimpy was cut short. The TV turned off. I turned around for cleaning the window, and Rooster was just sighing and shaking his head. He pulled out his cassette radio that was under the counter, and he was bitching under his breath. "Come here, I'll show you how to deal with Marvin." Who the fuck is Marvin? The icebox outside clunked, and I watched a packet of chips fall off the shelf. Marvin is a dick. Don't worry about it. But you need to know how to do this, so when you work with Amy, you can. She will leave the store before she helps out with him. At this point, I was getting pretty pissed because, I don't do ghosts. What the fuck? There's a ghost in here? Nah, you never actually see Marvin. He just does shit. Rooster explained that at some point or another during the night, Marvin turns off the TV and starts fussing about, knocking shit off shelves and tripping you over, exploding bottles of Coke, and walking around the store. He gets progressively worse the longer you ignore him. I sorta believe. But wait with Rooster. When we hear footsteps down the aisle, we keep toiletries. Then several tissue boxes fall off the top shelf, like someone hit them on their way past. The way to stop Marvin is simple. The radio cassette player had a bootleg cassette already sitting inside of it. Matt tried to get rid of it once and brought it back the next day, and Amy won't touch it. But Marvin loves Diana Ross and the Supremes, so you bring it out whenever Marvin decides to act out and play his tape. "Someday We'll Be Together" seems to be his favorite song. We've experimented with Marvin a lot since then. If you play the tape earlier in the night, he turns it off. He only wants to listen to it when he's ready. If you ignore him for more than an hour, the power trips out for a couple of seconds. If you fast forward through the song, the leak gets worse, and you have to start it again. I now play the song in my car a lot, so Marvin's okay. I guess I think he's lonely or sad, but I was never able to do anything about it. I mean, we don't even know his real name, or if it's even a guy. I know it wasn't really a scary story, and in fact, it makes me a little sad to share it, because playing the song every night/morning and trying not to think about why Marvin makes us play it for him is pretty upsetting. I just wanted to give you guys an idea of what working here was like. I worked for both night shift and day shift, depending on the roster that changed over, but normally, I do 2 weeks night shift, then 2 weeks day shift. If you have any questions about Marvin, feel free to ask away. I don't know much, but I'll answer what I can. One day, I was working the day shift with Amy. It was almost too hot to fucking move, and the air conditioning in the shop was busted. We had like 3 fans set up and on, but all you could smell was petrol and rotting mangoes, as somebody had spilled a bunch down the highway. The temperature was approaching 43 degrees Celsius, nearly 110 Fahrenheit, so these fans were doing fuck all. I could pretty much slick my hair back with my sweat. The fans were doing nothing but pushing the heavy stink petrol mango decay air around. The Northern Territory is so fucking awful. Amy looked like shit that day. I can remember clearly. She'd thrown her hair back in a ponytail, and there were weird strands sticking out. She looked like she hadn't slept in a good long time, and big sweat patches were on her back and underarms. We had to wear these god-awful white polos to work with name badges, and I knew if Amy looked like shit, then I, with my red hair and fair complexion, was a hotter mess than Courtney Love. At around midday, I was mopping up the fridge puddle, trying not to gag at the weird ozone and rot smell you get when stuff melts in fridges and freezers. Amy was prowling behind the till, back and forth, like a trapped feral cat. "You're gonna wear through the flooring," I said as a joke, and Amy just bared her teeth at me. "You're gonna tell me what to do, white fella?" she asked, and narrowed her eyes at me. Great, we devolved into her calling me white fella again. "My name is Blue," I said. Amy scoffed and continued pacing a hole in the floor. "That ain't your name. You and the bush hag. You live with used fake names, because the bad spirits took your old ones." I put the mop back in the bucket and wiped my face on the inside of my polo. "What? You live with the bush hag, eh?" "I live with my Aunt Vav, yes." Amy let out a peal of ugly laughter and produced a cigarette. "Vicious Vav, my uncle calls her. He and my cousin reckon she eats the goodness out of people. That's why she's stuck on her bloodland." And that was fucking great, because of course this gossip would catch up to me. "He calls her Vicious Vav?" Amy nodded. "Vicious Vav. They say at night she turns into a parenta and attacks people, so she can be a person during the day." "Amy, that doesn't make any sense. Parenta are reptiles. They're cold-blooded. They need the sun to be active. I know my shit about lizards and snakes here, and listening to Vav tell me Dreamtime stories meant I wasn't about to believe this shit spewing from third-generation scum." She pouted at that. "For those of you who don't know, if you see a wild parenta, it is probably as terrifying as seeing a crocodile, if not more so. They're the biggest monitor lizards Australia gets, and are generally about 2 meters long, either side of 6 foot. They're fucked. They can also stand on their hind legs, so can be as tall, if not taller, than a man. Also, as we're close to Catherine and not Alice Springs, it seemed unlikely that we would see any parenta at this point. Basically, Amy's a dumb bitch. Now, I have about half a foot of height on Amy, and easily 10 kilos. I was made for picking shit up, putting it down, so if we ever came to blows, I think physically I could do the most damage. However, there's something about living in these parts that teaches you not to be prey, something that makes weakness a shameful thing. After all, strength means little against somebody who will do absolutely anything to win. Another thing about the Aboriginals around here is that they will not fight alone. It's fucking annoying, and I've never had to deal with it. It's probably the best part about being Vicious Vav's nephew. I ended up making her put the cigarette out. Again, tension between Amy and I was high for the rest of the day. I get it, she was terrified of me. Terrified I was gonna hurt her somehow. But I needed this job, and I needed to know who the fuck her uncle was, and why he was spreading this shit. So we just carried on, tentatively being polite to each other, but not being overly friendly. At about 4 p.m., this woman pulled up in a white station wagon. She fueled her car, and I'd seen her in before. Her name was Deb, I was pretty sure, and she was missing her left foot. She had a metal prosthetic. We could see that day, because she was wearing shorts. Her sneakers squeaked on the linoleum, where the water was still drying, and I tried to break the ice between Amy and I, and asked how she thought Deb lost her leg. Start up a game of Who's That? Amy stared at Deb for a moment before she said, "They didn't want to run." Okay, I thought, never play with Amy again. Deb was a mousy little lady who had surprisingly strong-looking biceps and a slight burn across her nose and cheeks. She paid with rumpled cash and had a blank, small smile on her face the whole time. "Does she ever say anything when she comes in?" I asked. Amy shook her head and popped some of the gum she started chewing instead of smoking at work. I got home at about 7. Vav was already there, making mac and cheese on the stove. I told her about Amy and asked what the fuck she meant. Vav dumped the mac and cheese right in the fucking sink. "You wanna do this now?" she asked, raising a brow. I looked at the food that still had a chance of being salvageable. "No, Vav, it can wait," but she still ignored me and went into the bedroom. When she came back out, she had a whole bunch of papers shoved in between 2 pieces of wood, tied with string. "Here," she said, and sat across from me, lighting up a cigarette. They were illustrations of men and women, black and white, young and old, some children, staked to the ground, long pegs of wood through their torsos, hips, shoulders, palms, and ankles, pinning them to the ground like butterflies on a board. A couple of the images seemed to be instructional, how to pin someone down without them bleeding out right away. I flicked through a couple more, and one of them, a staked man, was on fire. There were more, corpses being left in some caves, the carrion being eaten by birds and lizards. There were a couple of people firing arrows into other people, made to stand, chains around their necks, attached to nearby trees so they couldn't run. "What the fuck is this?" I asked. "Did this really happen?" I looked up, and Vav was staring at the images, but there was no disgust at them, like I felt, not even any curiosity. She had a look, a resignation. "That's what we did." Vav went through each document, carefully outlining what was happening. She told me that ever since our family had come to Australia, we had been doing things like this. Up until her grandparents and their siblings, they had been the last. She said that we sacrificed, murdered, tortured people, that our land used to be much bigger, but she had been selling off portions when she could, that the way we claimed it was wrong. She said that we were scientists, pioneers in our field. Aboriginal lore dictates that a person can be transformed over time when exposed to the right things. She said that we were trying to recreate things from stories. However, we weren't doing that. We were just feeding what was already there, helping them breed. She told me the reason we all use nicknames is because our real names are family legacy, and nobody around here wants to associate with someone with that legacy. And then she told me I would never be able to escape it. We had friends, many friends that made everything go away. However, we had to go away as well. Then, we used up all our favors, and we were forced into exile. Vav tapped one of the only photographs in there. It was her as a child, smiling as she hugged a dog. But in order to fix this, we have to go back in. She placed one of the first images, the man on fire, in my hands. "This is why I need you. We have to work together. Now, I can be pretty stupid sometimes, but I am not a fucking idiot. So, of course, I fucking ran. I made it halfway out of the house when Vav tackled me. "You fucking idiot," she hissed. "You stupid fucking idiot. I'm not gonna kill you, Blue, for fuck's sake. I'm not helping you kill anyone else, either. For fuck's sake, will you please calm down? That's not what we're gonna do." I stopped struggling. "Then why the fuck would you show me all that stuff?" Vav let go of me and stood up. Her hands held out like she was trying to placate me, like I was a spooked horse. "I wanted to see how you would react, and you did well. So how much of that was true?" Vav laughed, shrugged. "I don't know. My husband drew those." I slumped down, feeling very fucking heavy. "Fuck you, Vav. You're a piece of shit," I wheezed. "You're a fucking cunt. I hate you." She grinned. "Just wanted to make sure you weren't insane." "Blue, I was just making sure." After that, every so often, Vav would make jokes. "Hey Blue, if I asked you to kill our neighbors, would you do it?" "Fuck you." "What if I said please?" She would laugh wildly and waggle her fingers at me, going back to her crossword puzzles. One night I was making spaghetti when there was a creak from outside. The geese hissed from near the kitchen door and hurried away. "Hello?" I called out. "Jeff?" I opened the door to see if it were spirits, because I was ready to blast my speakers at them. After the first couple of times, Vav told me about how the spirits, while craving other people, do not like loud noises. She says she thinks it is why there are less ghosts in highly populated areas. Vav came out of her bedroom, towel drying her hair. "Something out there?" she asked. I shrugged, moving back to the stove, stirring the sauce. "It's real though," she said, and I jumped. She was leaning against the counter to the left of me. "Those things we've been seeing, those are real, Blue." I shrugged. "I know sometimes it doesn't make sense, but I think something went wrong up here." She gestured to her head. "To help me deal with it. Your mom and me didn't have a good childhood out here, and neither did you. But those things, Jeff, the spirits, those are real. Some people like to mystify it and shit. They're just creatures. They can be hurt. Doesn't mean it isn't terrifying, I said. I used to be afraid a lot too, she said, smiling. Then I got angry because they ruined my life. Are you gonna let me see them so I know I'm not mad? What about Marvin? She asked. Marvin doesn't count, okay? She said. After dinner, we'll get in the truck and I'll show you. We drove for about an hour and a half. Vav took a turn off the highway onto the dirt road, and even with high beams on, it was pretty dark. I sat there quietly, and Vav had turned off the radio so I couldn't hum along. The windows were down so that we could hear, and it was nearly 11 when Vav turned out a big rock on the side of the road. The truck bounced a bit off the road, but it was nothing serious. I was pretty nervous and not really sure where we were going. Eventually, we pulled up, and Vav told me to get out. We walked for ages, until we came to a rocky climb. Vav hauled me up. We passed a stream, and we walked for about 20 minutes more. It felt like I was on a journey to fucking Mordor. Vav stopped when we came to a couple of large rocks that had a blue strip of material between them. Okay, she said. Here we are. I shone my torch around. There were just more rocks. But we were on an elevated spot, looking over an expanse of flat earth. Vav slung her backpack off her back and pulled out some stakes. She threw them out like disc, and they landed about 10 meters away. They should come out tonight, she said. It's the season for it, but be quiet. I went to speak, but Vav touched my arm. Her hand pressed over my lips, so no talking. We waited longer as something snuffled along. There were more, many more. Vav grabbed my arm and pulled me up so I was standing. Be prepared to run, if it's the wrong type, she said. There was a click as her torch left the area. They were chittering. They looked a bit like caterpillars, but each was about as round as long as a regular-sized fire hydrant. Their backs were crusted with soil, and their faces were strange, beaked with huge black pupils on either side of their heads. A couple heads swiveled towards the light, and they shrieked as though in pain. Vav started pulling me away. Let's go, she said. The stakes were gone, so these things had to be carnivorous. When one of them hissed at me, like a snake, its body began to quiver. It curled up, like a spitting cobra, which in hindsight should have been a warning. Their beaks clacked and chittered, and got louder. Its underbody revealed small sets of legs, twitching, with little spade-like claws, and a slit opened up from where the rest of its shaking belly rested on the ground. Vav swore and pulled me, but a shot of what I think was piss hit me on the collarbone and neck. The torch was off. Then, come on, Vav said. Did it get you? We began to pick our way quickly back to the car, but it was at least a 40-minute walk over loose rocks and changing inclines. Yes, I said. My skin began to itch, heating up. Yeah. Fuck. If you've ever had a migraine, you understand this pain. I could hardly walk. My legs kept slipping, and it felt like someone had picked me up, drilled some holes in my skull, and then dropped me down a fucking well. My eyes kept tearing up, and at one point Vav started pouring water down the side of my head. It felt like the skin where the piss hit me was gone. That I had to be pissing blood to feel this level of sensitivity, and I kept reaching up to feel it. It'll be fine, she said, but her voice was too loud. Come on, idiot, it's fine. There's hardly a mark. Let it be known that Vav is a piece of shit. Second only to Jeff, the tall man. We get back to the car. All I could hear was static and that high-pitched noise you get stuck in your head. I had no control over which way my head was rolling. I was bleeding from a couple of places. All places I'd fallen, tripped, or slipped. Vav said later it was lucky I was ragdolling about the place, because if not, I might have broken something more. I became more aware of my headache. Sometime after I was slumped against the window, my blood had left a nice imprint on the glass. We drove for a while, and the next thing, I was whimpering, trying to escape from some really fucking bright lights. Hiking, I heard Vav say then. Clumsy, terrible. Hadn't lost consciousness. I was able to refocus enough to realize Vav, champion of the people, had bothered bringing me to a clinic. While not a full hospital, it would do for now. At first, I thought Vav would take me home right away to try to treat me herself, but I think she knows that head injuries are something to be checked out. It turns out at one point that I had been stumbling, I went down like a bag of shit and cracked my head on a rock, only I didn't hit my regular bit of skull. Instead, it was my eye socket. I had an orbital fracture. I had to take a ride in an ambulance to the hospital and have a CT scan to look for blood behind my eye and the severity of the break. As it turns out, I am incredibly lucky when it comes to orbital fractures. I go to shower at the hospital with assistance of cool male nurse, and within 48 hours, I was home free. "The battered spouse clinic is not here, love," said Rooster. "But with a shiner like that, I can see why you're having trouble." Fuck off. Back at work a couple days later, I was rostered on to work the night shift with Rooster. I didn't want Matt to have a look at my face, so I kept it to myself. Rooster was watching that episode of Ren and Stimpy where Ren is an insomniac, while I was happy to not be on a property where every caterpillar, grub, and worm made me cringe. At about 11 p.m., the icebox outside stopped working. I was behind the till, and Rooster was restocking one of the fridges when it happened. The regular clunk happened, followed by a high-pitched whine. Rooster was sliding up to the glass only a few seconds later and stared at the icebox. "Is it off?" he asked, staring at it. It was a Tuesday, so the iced coffee, weird guy who always bought like 8 bags of ice, would probably be coming in soon, and he always complained if the ice wasn't as cold. Dude, it's fucking ice. Rule 1 of working night shift here still hasn't changed. Do not leave the store. But I can see Rooster looking at the icebox. It would take like 2 seconds to just go out and check. Rooster is still considering it when this person, out of fucking nowhere, is standing right in front of the doors. I didn't see them come up, neither did Rooster. He jumps, and this guy's standing there, in a white singlet and a pair of jeans, no shoes, and he's doing the hand-holdy thing. I can still hardly see out of my fucking eyes, and Rooster waves his hands around like a fucko. "Open the door," Rooster says. So I flick the switch and the doors open smoothly. This guy is all smiles and shit, and he says "good day" to Rooster, and for a moment I wonder if homo, but this guy had hairy toes, so no homo. He disappeared into the aisles, and before the door could close, Rooster slipped through and went over to the icebox, leaving me alone with this fucking guy. I was standing there like a limpet, and then I watch a packet of Samboy chips wobble off the shelf diagonally across from me, and then it fucking launches itself off the shelf and lands on the ground behind the till. I was on ibuprofen/codeine pills, so I was staring at this packet of chips, trying not to drool on myself, when this weird guy clears his throat. I ring up his purchases: 2 strawberry gums, a Coke, and a Kit Kat. A bottle of Coke exploded in the fridge that Rooster was just restocking. "Just this?" I ask. Weird guy nods. "Yes, just these, thank you." A packet of Fisherman Mint starts to eject itself from the little mint stand next to me, and I'm getting this guy's change. I can hear another couple of boxes of tissues coming off the top shelf, and Marvin is stomping angrily around the store. This guy looks at where it falls and says, "Stop," quiet as anything. And the weirder part is, Marvin does. This guy raised his index and middle finger at me, pointing them like a little shooty gun. "Cheers," and cocked his thumb. This guy gave me super fucking creeps. Like, he'd left really dirty fucking footprints everywhere. And the second I flipped the door switch to let him out, Rooster came back in, and the door closed. And Marvin cut the power for almost 3 minutes. Alright guys, I have to leave now, if I'm gonna make it to work on time. Next time, I'll have all my stories ready typed up and I'll just bulk post them. Hope you all enjoyed. See you in a couple of days.